Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint Christmas mittens on a 11 by 14 inch canvas. And I'm going to go ahead and briefly go over the brushes and colors that I used for this painting. These are the Princeton Velvet Touch brushes, so I used a 3/4 wash, a 3/8 inch angle number 4 round, and a toothbrush for the little snow dots. For the colors, I used primary blue, cadmium red medium hue, hooker's green, hue permanent, titanium white, Mars black, burnt umber, and I used copper, but you can use any kind of metallic colors such as gold or silver for the little bells that are hanging out of the gray mitten. And we are going to go ahead and get started. All of the materials and colors and brushes are listed in the description of this video and in the written tutorial. I'm going to load my palette with primary blue and titanium white, about equal amounts, and I will be using the 3/4 flat brush. So load that brush in the water, kind of tap it dry so it's not dripping wet, and I'm going to go ahead and mix blue and white together. So about equal amounts, kind of in between those colors on the palette, mix those two together. So we're going to do something kind of different with the background. If you want to simplify this and do straight lines, you can, but I decided to do a background that has wavy lines to make it look like it is a windy winter day. So basically start out with just making a long wavy line, and then we're just going to contour this. So just blending it, doing wet on wet blending on the canvas. I just want to create different variations of this blue. So adding more white into it is going to make it look lighter. Doing more of the primary blue and less white is going to make it look darker. I'm going to make it look slightly darker towards the top of the canvas and slightly lighter towards the bottom. Although you don't have to make it that way, you can just kind of vary it all throughout the background. There's no way you can mess this background up. It's just two colors that are blending together on the canvas. So towards the top of the canvas, I kind of made another kind of curvy line that went a different direction. And I'm just going to blend that down into that bottom one so it just kind of meshes together. So basically, I'm blending blue and white together. I'm doing long, full width strokes, wavy lines, wet on wet blending, and it's creating kind of this wavy effect in the background. So towards the top, I'm going to be adding a little bit extra blue up here so that it becomes slightly darker. But again, you don't have to do it this way. You can have it just be a light color throughout or a dark color throughout. When you're done with the background, we're going to do the little snow dots, and I used a toothbrush this time around to make little fine dots on the background, and in a much later step I paint actual snowflakes and snow dots. So I'm going to go ahead and rinse my 3/4 brush off and set that to the side, and so grab my toothbrush that I use for splattering. So basically you want to slightly wet the toothbrush, load that into the white. You want to test this out first, because if it's too thick, it's going to make little dots that don't look like dots. They'll be too thick. If it's too wet, it will make saturated dots that will start dripping down the canvas, and you don't want that either. So you want a nice combination of water to white, and once you test that out, you want to just go ahead and flick the little dots all throughout. It'll show up better against the darker parts of your painting. The lighter parts, it is going to not show up very well because there's not a lot of contrast. So you want to go ahead and let this dry before proceeding to this next step. In the next step, we will be painting the branch. And for this branch, I used my 3/8 inch angle brush. Now, if you don't have an angle brush, or if you don't like using the angle brush, you can do this with the round brush or a bright brush. I demonstrate branches using a variety of brushes. So this time around, I'm going to do it with the angle brush. Go ahead, load your brush in the water, tap it dry, and then load it with the brown. The little bit of water on the brush will kind of distribute with the paint, kind of loosen that brown a bit so that it is easier to work with and flow, because we need a nice flowy color for these branches. And we're going to start on the far left. This is a very basic branch. We're not doing any shading or highlighting to it. So you want to start the very, very top left, create a thicker end to it, and then as it goes thinner, you can kind of twist your brush and use more of the side of the brush, and then you want your branch to kind of drop down and then go to a point. So I just kind of created that line, but then I'm going back over my line and making it thicker. The nice thing about using this angle brush is you can get some really precise strokes in here. So I'm doing kind of the edge of it, holding my brush on the side, because you can get some very thin pieces. So when you take this and you kind of make your little branches that go out, you use more of that angle part to create your thinner stroke. So it kind of creates much, much easier to control stroke that goes thinner. With each of these branches, you want to make sure that the base of it is slightly thicker, so you're adding slightly more pressure on the bottom of the branch, and you're just kind of releasing the pressure to create it, to get it to be thinner, so that's, you're holding it lighter and you're using just more of the tip of it. I'm going to get this to be a little bit thicker, just because we have a lot of canvas to work with. So I'm just going to get these to be slightly thicker. Our mittens are going to be hanging from the branch. So just kind of keep in mind as you're doing these little pieces that are sticking out, think about where the mitten on the right is going to be hanging. Of course, we can always make our string for the mitten kind of tie on to wherever that branch is at. I'm just going back and making them a little bit more thicker. Notice the edges of this branch kind of slightly curvy, not straight edged, but kind of wobbly on the edges. So there's my basic branch. If you want to, I'm going to add another one down here. So my gray mitten can be hanging from this one that's kind of hanging down. And I'll go back in and make the base of that one slightly thicker. So we're not going to be adding highlight or shading to this, but we will be adding snow on top of that once that brown dries a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and load my palette with Hooker's Green Hue Permanent. And you don't need to wait for this to dry all the way to do this step because if a little bit of brown kind of mixes with the green, that's okay. So we'll be using the angle brush for the pine needles, and I find the angle brush to be helpful when painting these pine needles. So kind of the same thing, you want to create very, very thin strokes using your angle brush. So I'm starting at the tip of one of these branches. I have green and I'm just using the tip of the brush, not using the full width, just the tip. Very, very light pressure as you're creating these little angled lines. You want to always start at the end of your branch piece and then work inwards. And each stroke kind of overlaps the previous set of strokes. And if you want to, you can take this white, mix it with your green, and that's going to create a different kind of tint for your pine needle. So it's not all the same color, but if you're simplifying this painting, you can make it all the same color, it's fine. But I like to create a variety of colors. It creates, gives it that more realistic effect. So you're just loading your brush in green and white. And this one right here, the brown was wet, so it started dragging into some of those pine needles. I'm going to go back over this one with some of the lighter colors. I'm going to try to avoid dragging too much brown into that. I want it to kind of smear together. And you're just basically on the tip of each of these branches, you're doing your little pine needles. So you're just holding that brush so that you're just working the tip of that brush. Next, I am going to add some snow that is starting to pile up on our branch. So we're going to use the number 4 round brush for this in titanium white. So if your brown is not dry, you want to skip this step and come back or dry it really quick because we don't want this brown to be mixing with our white. We want this white to be nice and bright and pure without the brown blending into it. So I'm just loading the white on the tip of the brush and I'm stippling this. That means I'm just creating dots, but I'm kind of doing thick, sort of rounded dots almost. And I'm just doing little snow piles kind of bunched up. You want to create variety in this, so some of it might be a little bit higher, some might be a little bit lower, some might be more spread out. So wherever that snow would be landing, you're just doing very simple little white dots. Just tapping the tip of your brush to create this. And next I want to add just one more layer to my pine needles. I'm going to add a lighter color. So maybe some of these are frosted. So I'm going to load white to this brush, kind of thinned down. So this is not thick and it's not as bright as that snow. Just very, very thin white. In fact, the green's not dry, so a lot of this is just kind of mixing with that green. But I'm just going back over with that lighter color, and that's going to add some brightness to your pine needles. You don't have to cover all of your dark green. In fact, you want most of that dark green still showing through. Next, I'm going to draw the mittens. So I have a template for this. If you want to skip the drawing part, there's nothing wrong with using the template. In fact, I almost used a template for this, but I'm just going to go ahead and draw these in. You can use a pencil or a piece of chalk. I'm using just a regular drawing pencil. And you want to create your mittens so they're upside down. If it helps, you can turn your canvas the other way so you can draw them right side up. But you want your large piece to be rounded and then your thumb piece to be smaller. And then right here, the base of our mitten, you want a straight line, and then we'll make that kind of a curved line later. Then you want to sketch that shape of that mitten cuff. So it's kind of rounded on the sides and the top and the bottom. So it's not exactly a rectangle. It's a rectangular shape, but the ends of the lines are curved. I'm going to redo the thumb. So it's a little bit more rounded and sticking out more towards the right. And this will be adjusted as we paint it in. So there's our first mitten. And then our gray one kind of depends on where your brown branches ended up. I'm going to start by drawing the cuff of this one so I can figure out the angle. I want to make them relatively the same size. This one's going more at an angle. So I'm kind of just sketching the same thing opposite, and it's going at an angle. So we have our little thumb piece and our wider finger piece. I want to make it stay on the canvas and not really go off the edge. So lots of sketchy lines for this. Thumb, our cuff is our rectangular shape, but it's got the curved edges, curved corners and curved edges. And then we can kind of guess how this is hanging, so we can draw the direction of our string. So our gray one has kind of a longer string. So it kind of depends on where your branches are and the location of your mittens, but the strings can be any length and they're going to be tied to the branches. So when you're done with your mitten drawing, you can go ahead and load your palette with the colors that you're going to be painting your mittens. So if you're using my colors, you can customize your mitten colors, by the way. So this one, I'm going to do the red mitten on the left first. This is Cad Red Medium Hue. So you don't need to paint your mittens white first and then paint over it. Unless your background is super dark, then I recommend painting them white first. But the background here is light enough to where there should be enough coverage. And I'm using the angle brush to paint it in. This is a 3/8 inch angle brush. It kind of is kind of worked out for this because I'm able to get those curves using that angle brush. I can really get in there and cut in on the edges. But basically, I'm painting the entire shape of the mitten a solid coat of red, and then I'm going to go in and add some highlighting and shading to it. But first, it's just solid red. Same thing with the gray. If you're painting the gray one first, it's just a solid coat of gray. So I'm just doing this, kind of contouring it, so you're outlining the shape, and then you're using the full width of the brush to just fill it in. Just kind of going around, filling it in. The cuff part of the mitten is going to be a lighter color, so I'm not going to fill that part in right now. So see how that one kind of curves downwards. And you can definitely adjust the shape of your mittens, so you can see there's pencil lines still showing because I kind of change the shape slightly of the mitten, and that's okay. We can erase our pencil lines at a later step. So really using that tip of the brush to define that shape. And this is a stylized illustrative painting. It does not have to look realistic. So if your mitten is misshaped or kind of oddly shaped, that's okay. Before this mitten dries, I'm going to add white to my brush. So I added white, so it's red and white mixed together, makes a lighter red. And on the right side of the mitten, I'm going to add this lighter color in there. My red layer is not dry, so this is blending in. So I'm going to do like this expressive stroke blending, but not over blend. So when you mix your lighter color with the red in the mitten and you do these like little short angled strokes, try not to over blend it. It creates more of a painting look and gives that mitten a little bit of texture. So you can see that little pop of lighter color on the right side of our mitten. We'll be doing a darker color on the left side of the mitten. So for the darker color, we're going to go ahead and rinse our brush off to get the white off. And we are actually going to use the green and mix that with the red to do our shading. Typically, you can use an opposite color if you're going to shade something. So the opposite of red is green. I'm going to mix a little bit of green into the red. You don't need equal amounts, so you need about 2 parts red, 1 part green. If you do equal amounts, it's going to be kind of turn brown, so a little bit less green than red, but you can see that it's creating that shadowy color. So I kind of outlined it, and then I took my brush and just kind of dragged it into the rest of the red. So the far left part of that is darker, dragging it in to blend it so that's kind of lighter in the middle. I'm also going to make this part shadowy. So this whole top part that's going to be under the cuff, so it's like that cuff part is casting a shadow on the fabric. So I'm making that dark. I'm dragging it down vertically so that part is shadowy as well. That's going to create some really pretty contrast in our mitten as well, because the cuff part is a lighter piece and it's going to be against the dark. I also made the far left part of the thumb a little bit darker. And I'm going to go ahead and rinse this off because I'm not intentionally adding more darker colors to this. I want to get that darker green or darker red off. I'm going to go back. I'm just going to fix this part right here. Re-outline that far part of the thumb. And I'm going to start painting that cuff in. So that's going to be a lighter color, but I want to go ahead and just define that shape first. So it's kind of a curvy rectangular shape. I'm going to add more white to my palette. So this color is white and red. So that same kind of light color we used to highlight the mitten, we're going to use just that. So white and red. Go ahead and you can see that contrast already, that lighter part of that red against the shadow part of the mitten. Use the tip of the brush to define the shape and then fill it in. You can do, let's do vertical strokes all throughout because we're going to create some texture in our mitten cuff later, kind of that sweater texture. So you can use the tip of the brush to outline the shape and then vertical strokes to fill it in. You can even take that red, vertical strokes, see how it creates that texture, that sweater texture, just by creating those darker strokes. We can go back later with black to kind of make that stand out a little bit better. And then we are going to move on to our gray mitten. So for this, I used Mars Black and Titanium White to make a medium gray color. I'm going to get my angle brush all rinsed off, dry, and mix our color on the palette. So we're gonna do about equal amounts of black and white, maybe a teeny bit more white so that it's not too dark at first. When I mix colors, especially grays, I don't like to mix it all the way on my palette. So you can see how I'm mixing it on the palette, but lazy and not mixing it all the way. And that's on purpose because I like color variation. So I like to see it blend on the canvas. It gives it some really pretty different shades of gray. But kind of the same technique that we did with the red, just outlining it using the tip and then contouring our strokes so they're curvy, going in the direction of the shape. We want to make sure that it's more shadowy just under the cuff because, like the red one, the cuff is a lighter color and it's casting a little bit of a shadow underneath it. So you want to make sure that your dark part of the mitten is just right there at the top under the cuff. And the rest of it, you can kind of decide where you want your highlight to go. So lighter color on one edge, you can do darker color on the other edge. If you're simplifying this painting, you don't have to do the shading and highlighting. You can do your mittens a solid color and that's fine. So I'm going to take that a little bit more of that black, drag that in there towards the top, kind of blend it down with the rest of it so that the top part is darker and more shadowy. And then trying not to overblend all that gray. You can see the different darks and lights in there without overblending it. So the cuff, I did not rinse my brush off. Instead, I just grabbed white so that this will start out lighter. But I did the same thing, outline it, and then vertical strokes in the middle. And you can see just by creating those vertical strokes, it's already creating that sweater texture because it's that little bit of darkness still left on the brush that's kind of blending with my lighter color. And then we can go in and add black lines in there on purpose to give it more of that sweater texture. We will need both of our mittens to dry before we do any patterns or textures on to the mittens. So I'm going to go ahead and rinse my angle brush off, set it to the side, and use the round brush. I'm going to be painting the strings that are attached to the mitten, tied to the tree. And I just use the same color from each mitten. You could change the string color if you want. So this is the number 4 round brush. I have red and white. I'm just going to take my round brush, use the red, kind of twist it so that that paint is right there on the tip of the brush. And I'm just going to paint a string. Starts from the cuff, like the side of the cuff, goes around the branch, pick it up so it looks like it's going around the branch. And then we can do a little bow, so 2 little loops. You just want to pay attention to the contrast in this area because this is the same color that I used in the cuff. So it's not going to stand out if it ends up being the same colors. You might need to darken it or lighten it depending on how dark or light your cuff is. So I'm just making that part show up a little bit better. You can add white into it. If you need to, you can add a little black into it if it's not really standing out, or you can add a little green to your red to make a darker red. And then same thing with our gray mitten. So I use the same colors. I'm going to start with the black And this one's going to be tied to this branch that's kind of hanging down. So it does depend on where your branch is. You can bring this string up higher and have it be tied to another branch. But loop goes around the branch, and then there's a little bow over here. If you want to make the bow on top of the branch to make it look like the bow was tied at the very top, you can, if that makes more sense to you. So two little loops, and then little pieces that are kind of flowing. The wind is blowing in this painting, so we want to make the little loopy pieces kind of blowing the same way. And then, so that's dark, and then I can go back and add some lighter color into it. So I just grabbed that white, just kind of went over what I painted, let that white kind of blend with that black, gives it some highlight. So by now our mittens should be dry or relatively dry. If they're not, I recommend drying them or coming back to this step later. I'm going to do the little knitting texture pieces. So to do that, simply, we're using gray, but we want to create contrast. So it needs to be a lighter gray than what it is now. So this is white with a little bit of black. You're just creating little angled lines that are kind of going in a pattern, same pattern all throughout the mitten. So you're doing angle, angle, and you're making rows of these little zigzag angles, and there's like a little gap between each angle. And each of them, it's not offset, it's all the same. And then you're just going to create the impression, a very simple impression, that this is a knitted mitten. You might have to change the gray color. So if there's a lighter part of the mitten, you might need to add a little bit more black to it to create contrast. But for the most part, it should be showing up. So you're just doing very simple zigzag knitted line, and you're creating, make sure there's space between each of your angle lines, and see how it's all stacked up because it's all the same. The row is exactly the same. So when we get to the thumb part, it might be a little bit tricky, but you're just doing the same exact thing as if there was no thumb. It's just the same row going across. And then when you get to just under the cuff part, do the same thing and just stop. So there's your very simple version of knitted texture. If you want to do the same thing to the red mitten, you can. I'm going to take that black, I mentioned this earlier, but we can do black lines to create that sweater texture, that little ribbed texture. Watering that down slightly just so I can thin that and make it more flowy. I can create a much thinner line by watering it down and kind of twisting my brush. It was creating too thick of a line at first, so I thinned it down a bit. So there's my gray mitten. For the red one, instead of the knitted texture, I did a pattern. So I did titanium white, and I just did different line design patterns on it. Again, you can change this. You can do a snowflake, a heart. You can do whatever design you want on these mittens. So I started with polka dots. And you want to make sure that when you're doing these designs that it's going, at least for me, I decided to have it go in a curved direction. So it's not going to be very evident until you do something like this. So this is curved instead of straight. It gives your mitten a little bit more form. And you want to continue the pattern from the thumb to the rest of the mitten. So just little designs. If you need inspiration, you can look up Christmas mitten clip art, look at different designs on those if you want to change it. And just like what we did to the gray mitten, I'm going to do the black ribbed lines on this one as well. In this next part of the painting, we will do the little items that are inside of our mittens. This is an optional step if you want to simplify this painting and just have winter mittens. You can do that. You don't have to put candy canes or holly or bells in this, but this is just fun details that we can do. I'm going to start, I'm using the number 4 round brush, and I'm going to start by doing the candy cane. And if you are struggling with this candy cane, I recommend drawing it out first or using a piece of chalk to kind of draw it, because we only see the top part of it, but it can be kind of tricky doing the rounded piece. So I did use the titanium white, the round brush, and I just did the top part of the cane because the rest is inside. And if we accidentally paint over part of the cuff, that's okay. We can go back over and paint the cuff again. But there's that top part of the candy cane. And if you want to do different things like a gingerbread man or a little name tag with a name on it, little Christmas lights hanging out, you can get super creative with this. For the holly, I used that green, but you might need to play around with the contrast to get it to show up. So you might need to add white into it to get it to be brighter. But I did the little leaf, so it's like these little inverted pointed lines forming the leaf, and then this one have to overlap our candy cane a little bit. So you just kind of do your little inverted lines with the round brush, and then you paint it in solid. We'll do another layer over this leaf to kind of help get it to stand out a bit better. Next, I'm going to do these little berry pieces that are kind of hanging out on the side, and I'm going to do the little sticks that the berries are attached to. So I'm mixing burnt umber with white, still using the number 4 round brush, kind of twisting it because these are going to be thin lines. So a brown piece that's just hanging out on the side, 2 brown lines, and then on the ends of those brown lines, I'm going to do little red berries. So a little some more red onto my palette. Get that rinsed, dry, and doing the red. So some of these berries are larger, some smaller, so little red circles. If you want to change the color of this to like a darker red, you can do a darker red. So 2 kind of larger circles, 3 larger circles, and then I'll do some smaller circles. So like a smaller one right here and a smaller one right here. And then when this dries, I can add the white highlight to it. Then we can start decorating the inside of this mitten. So same thing, I'm going to do a candy cane. This one's facing the left. Again, highly recommend drawing these candy canes out A little tricky, especially that top, because we just see that top curved part. So this one is overlapping part of the cuff. The tip of it is. And then we can do our holly leaf, so the green and white, kind of adding water to that to kind of loosen that paint, twisting my brush. When you load the paint and twist the brush, you get that paint right there on the tip, so you can do these finer lines. So I outlined the shape of the leaf and then painted it in solid. This one as well, same thing, kind of an inverted shape. And then we have two little bells. They don't really stand out too much in this painting, but it is a fun little detail. I did the string with the blue, so this is the primary blue. I did just this line that's kind of hanging down over the cuff. Two lines. And then add a little bit of white into that. Get that to stand out just a bit better so that we can see it. For the bells, this is bronze. You can use bronze, gold, silver, any kind of metallic color. This bronze color tends to be opaque enough to where I don't have to do a white layer first. If you're doing this with another metallic color and see how it's showing up, you can see it. But if you're doing it and so we're just doing two little circles for the shape of the bell first. But if it's too see-through, you might have to do a white layer first and then go back over it with your metallic color. So this is bronze. I did a circle, and then I did a little kind of a loop piece that's going to be attached to our string. So we're just creating Jingle Bell. And I'm taking that white before that copper dries, and on the left part, doing kind of like a highlight. And on the left part of our little handle piece. And we're going to let that dry before doing anything else to it. But then I'm going to take this string, the blue, and go on the right part of the handle, just on the right part, another piece of blue string. So that's going to make it look like the string is attached to those bell pieces. Next, I'm going to go in and do a second layer to my holly leaves. So on one side of the leaf, we have darker green. And I just went ahead and mixed a little bit of black with the green. So that's going to make a really dark green. And so you just pick one side, paint that half your darker color, and then leave your other half that lighter color. If you want to do a lighter color second coat on the other side, you can, if you feel like that's something you want to do for it to show up better. So same thing over here, one side darker, the other side is going to stay lighter. Next, I'm going to go ahead and do the stripes on the candy cane. So you want to make sure that the white part is dry, otherwise it's going to be a mess if you do these stripes right now and the white's not dry. So I'm just going to do a clean number 4 round brush, load that in the red, and just do these stripes. Started on one side, curved little stripes around the candy cane that go to the tip. And I'll make these a little bit thicker. If you want to do different colored stripes, you're welcome to. And then I did the same thing over here. Next, I'm going to do the little highlights on the berries. So rinse, dry, grab your white, and This is a small detail, so I'm going to twist my brush to get that paint right there on the tip. Little highlight on the ends of those berries, and these guys just get a little dot. Then I'm going to loosely outline my holly leaves just on one side. So the side that has the lighter color of the green, I took that white and just outlined the end of those little leaves. Gives it a little pop of contrast. And then I'm going to work on my bells over here again. So with the black, do a little circle right in the center and then a little curved line. So a little circle, little curved line. So it gives it that little jingle bell look. And then I'll take that black, kind of outline that top curved part. We don't have to outline the entire shape, but just parts of it, just to get it to pop a little bit better. And a little bit of outline on the handle piece and on the bottom part of the circle as well. And then I did little red circle berries in the center, or at the base of those holly leaves. They're kind of sticking out of the mitten as well, so just 3 little circles. If you want to highlight these, you can. Next, I'm going to do the little snow flurries and snowflakes in the background. This is a final detail in this painting, so you can take your round brush, you can do snowflakes. So I did a little X and vertical line, horizontal line, and then little diagonal lines on the lines themselves. And you can kind of change this up a little bit for each snowflake. You can add little dots on the tips of your lines. Your snowflake's not going to show up that well on the lighter part of the sky, but on the darker part of the sky it will. So you can do a combination of different snowflakes and doing a little snow dots everywhere. So for the snowflake, you just do an X, you do a vertical line, horizontal line, and then on the ends of each of those lines, you do like little diagonal lines. You can do dots. You can change it up a little bit, add diagonal lines in the middle of the lines, and then you can make sure each of your snowflakes are slightly different from each other throughout the painting. Little snow dots everywhere. So just kind of take your time and add whatever kind of snowflakes or snow dots you want throughout your sky. And then there is a little bit of snow kind of piling in some areas on the mittens, although I don't want it to look super busy, so I didn't do a lot of snow on some of these objects. Just a few little dots of snow kind of on the edges of the holly leaves and on the cuffs. And then did a little bit of white kind of on the far left edge of the jingle bells, and then some more little snow dots all throughout the sky. And that is it. This is the conclusion of how to paint Christmas mittens. Hope you enjoyed this painting tutorial. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.